Hello everyone, welcome to the next practical session, and also welcome to anybody, to any e-surface out there. This is, I'm not sure, well, it's the last practical for racism, race and racism. Next time we will go to feminism, gender and feminism. So we are using the reflective analysis sessions to critically look at what people say out there, and we're using YouTube mostly because it's accessible to everyone, or to almost everyone in most countries, let's say liberal countries. So I've asked you to look at what Ibram X. Kendi said about what CRT is and isn't. I thought it was a short one, so I coupled it with that one of South African doctorates, but then it was too long. So we're going to do this differently. I don't know whether you found it short or long, but I've got a few things to say. So let me get started. And first, much of it will be the same than the others, because not much changes. But the first topic I've got, if I look at, if I listen to Kendi, is the following: the thinginess of critical race theory. What is it as a thing? Again, there's this indecisive reference to critical race theory as a sort of intellectual field. I really don't know what that means. It's sort of an intellectual field. So it's sort of not. It's an intellectual field, but dumbed down so that everybody can understand it. Is that what it means? I don't know. You can decide for yourself. Most of you will know what I really think. Right. Again, he tells us it emerged in the 70s and 80s of the previous century, 1970, 1980. And again, surprisingly consistent, it's legal students. Right. It was the seeding of CRT idea was racial disparity that was seen to persist despite public pronouncements that all the laws were race neutral, is all surprisingly consistent again. However, the question is if the evidence were evaluated objectively. Now, of course, they might say it was, but remember, they don't believe in objectivity, they only believe in subjectivity, so they shouldn't really say that. Right, next, CRT advocates recognize the source of continuous disparity, and that means what? They recognize the source. They recognize the source. There's no research. And they acted on that. They just recognized it. So that was Jungian dream that tells them what's wrong or what's right in society. Or they've just got 2020 vision within their imaginations. I'm not sure, but they recognized it. They recognized the source. Can they provide us with reasons why critical approach was selected? Remember, I asked, why did they select a critical source or a critical theory as a basis? if they're not Marxist? They claim they're not Marxist, some of them claim they are. But when you're in critical theory, you are within the Marxism dialectic idea. Now, they selected because, this is just my idea, the intention was to pin the blame on institutions and their operations, the laws and policies and structures, and deflect the focus from the behavior of a community. Remember, Kendi says, the problem is that the white people in this country say there's no racial problem. Any problem for instance, poverty or legal action, more of them are in jail. Is there something wrong with the people? And Kendi says, that's just not true. It's a system. So that's what I'm referring to there. However, it could be the people, because there's ample evidence that in a community there are sub-communities, and a sub-community may decide, and I've seen this, that we're not bound to the laws of this country. We don't feel part of this. During apartheid, that's exactly what the black people said. This is not our system. This is a colony system. We're not part of it. We can break those laws. It's actually moral to break those laws. Same thing can happen in the area where Kendi is, but he's not acknowledging it. By not acknowledging that part of it, the rest of it is, well, let's say, doubtful. But what reasons did he give us? Let me see. I want to suggest that there could be a culture of resistance. That's what I've just said. Right. Make right crimes committed in the community. Its members. Crimes can be committed by members, by outsiders, by government agencies. In addition, this obvious pre-selection of cause and solution is the hammer and nail problem. Remember the accidental hammer which we had? So that's to help him avoid what's actually right in front of him. Avoid reality. Right, and then they also, actually Kendi in his piece, failed to employ occultist's chisel. Instead of an ethically reflective, aesthetic-seeking and useful way towards the solution, they chose rage, rightmanship, and revolution. Revolution is a hammer and the disparities of the shells, or the nails actually, to be hammered into institutions. Right, so he didn't really tell us why a critical system was the best way to go, except that they wanted to mobilize people and to get to a radical change. Now, if you want to be radical, that's the way to go. The second thing I saw about Kendi was his insistence that people don't see critical race theory correctly. We have misconceptions. Now, he's given quite a few misconceptions here. And I'm also asking, with what words and tones do CRT theorists communicate with white people? That they subscribe to the lie that they are made out to be inherently evil. So his misconception is, white people say but critical race theory say they are inherently evil. And he says that's just not true. So I'm asking, why are they saying that? Just to be mean? Because they are evil? Remember, we're talking ecosystems here. An ecosystem says, you do something, I do something, then you do something, and then I do something. So there should be shared responsibility, shared accountability in an ecosystem. Of course, when you're in critical theory, you're not an ecosystem. You're not even in a proper dialectic to find a synthesis. So why do the white people think? And it's not all the white people. You might think it's all the white people, but it's not. It's a minority. He's focusing on a minority because it serves his purpose. That's how I feel about it. I'll tell it back to his face. Right. Here's another one. But the white people say, but critical race theory thinks that every white person is a racist. Everything and everyone is a racist. Everything looks at the institutions. He says that's not true because he knows that there are white people who preaches anti-racism, who preaches critical race theory. It's like when I'm white and you say I'm a racist and I'm saying, I've got black friends. Do they agree with it? No, they don't. However, we're doing the very, very same thing here. Just this week in South Africa, I heard a minister, a black minister, saying, he's not a racist, he's got white friends. So, yeah, I don't think that one is playing out too well. But, as Prof. Labuschagne said, remember we had her a while ago, I'm happy to hear a student make a well-reasoned, well-thought-out, well-substantiated, conservative argument about something. But then she admits that when the student has a different, I assume opposing role, a different world view than me, then a debate between us is just not possible. Remember I said she's saying two different things, opposing things, and both could hardly be true. So now, in his own way, Kendi is doing the very, very same thing. And remember she had that argument about a liberal, which we would think liberals are more non-racial. And she said, their arguments are just knee-jerks. No, I'm not interested in them as well. So the conservative, she likes, but she doesn't believe him. She can't work with him. The liberals who want to work with her, she just don't like him. She just don't like him. Kendi is doing exactly the same thing. Now, let's go on. Also, Kendi is making this observation that white people think critical race theory is taught in schools. And this is just not true. How can white people believe us? However, again, Prof. Labuschagne said, she's taking racism and anti-racism to the schools. K-12 she calls it, if I remember correctly. So, to their own admission, it's there, and then they just have to lie about it. I'm sorry. Kendi is lying. If I listen to Prof. Billy. Also said the same thing. She said both. Right. The other thing which white people gets wrong is they say that critical race theory or anti-racism, which is Kendi's thing, which is kind of a spin-off from critical race theory, is anti-white and racist. As he says, is one of the oldest and most vile white supremacist talking points. These vile white supremacists sounds to be real evil people. Remember, this is what he said. This is the most vile white supremacist talking. At least what he's doing is he's not saying it's all whites. He's looking at the supremacists. Are they white supremacists? I will very much think so. Just look at the American election. On both sides, the Republicans and the others, liberals, the Democrats. And one of those groups, you will see these white supremacists. They want to make white America great again. And they're using black people on the rallies to, well, I don't know why. But let's leave it there. First thing I've noticed. Examples of misinformed who bashes critical race theory again for white people. Now, Kendi goes on and in his video he plays several clips from Governor Kristi Noem, who was in war mode, the Republican Kevin McCarthy, and McCarthy looked really nervous and unsure and almost apologetic for his perspective. You can just go and look at it. You might have seen it. But it was an opportunity in front of a camera, so he had to use it. But he's almost pushed out of politics now. The other clip was that of Governor Ron DeSantis, another Republican, of one ability only, and that is to continuously double down. Of course, there's another one, he lies a lot. Just repeating their names give them more credibility than what they deserve. Just by showing them again on his video to make a point, gives them credibility, which I don't think they deserve, personally. But who am I to speak? Then he's on about at least 9 states have passed laws to ban CRT from schools. So we're banning something which is not there. And another 20 states is pending. Now again, it is driven by these same governors and politicians he's talking about. Things like that are happening. But it's impossible to happen if there's not something there. That's what I believe. And I believe there is something there. Right. That's his examples. And then he'll say, he'll give us proof. He'll give us proof. And what does he say? He concludes with a well-reasoned, well-thought-out, well-substantiated CRT argument. And he says the following. It is inconceivable that a white teacher will teach white children that they are evil. Remember, he's now back that CRT teaches people, white people, they are evil. because they are white. The accusation is therefore blatantly false. But that is what these people think. You didn't say these people, I'm saying it. But there's one problem though. It is inconceivable, or is it inconceivable or impossible? Or is there a low probability? This is inconceivable. There might be a low probability, I think. My experience in real life and from YouTube presentations is that it's very likely. Very likely they see and teach white people that they're evil. We've had a case locally less than 3 months ago in a school when it happened. And who did it? It's all our clever people who is into diversity and inclusivity, about race, about gender, about sex. We need to be equal. However, they don't understand their own subject. They are there for money, and they can challenge me on that. Anytime you can challenge me on that, later on that. I see there's one who really wants to challenge me. Okay, I'm waiting. Now, just make sure of the facts. I'm going to say another thing, and maybe I shouldn't say it here, but I found that professors and people with PhDs in the field of diversity and inclusivity really know very little about this subject. In a previous lifetime, I worked within civil engineering. I wasn't a civil engineer, I just worked in that regime, more on the geology side. But people who had a PhD knew their detailed stuff, and they knew the general stuff of the subject of engineering. It's not the case when you look at diversity and inclusivity and all the different names they've given it. The professors and the PhD students know only about a tiny little bit of a subject which they studied in, and it's all the same. Like we have with Kendi, like we had with Crenshaw, like we had with Prof. Billings. They don't understand the broader thing, and that's what we're doing here at the Reflective Dialectic. We look at the broader space of human diversity. Right, sorry for that. I shouldn't have done that, but I did it. I can't take it back. Let's get back to Kendi. Right. The fifth thing. The link between policy and inequality is an historic debate. What does that mean? That's just the topic I have. The following positions were held over why inequalities exist. There's a racist position. Inequality exists because there is something inferior or superior about different race groups, culturally, behaviorally, and genetically. Thus, racists buy into Hitler's gene dialectic from the 1940s and claim the others are bad. It's the same thing. When Kendi says that racism thinks of some people as inferior, others are superior, we're back to Hitler. Now I know there's people who want to go back to what Hitler did, I'm not one of them, and I surely hope none of you are. Right, it's just war and death and blood. Other explanations are possible, and they may very well exist as subculture. Remember, I told you that already. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just a different subculture. We just see the world a bit differently. But they're mentally sound, they're genetically sound. There's not something wrong with them. They've got a different perspective. Shouldn't they have it in a liberal society? I would think so. In a communist society, a radical society, a Marxist society, you don't have that freedom. And I think that's where he's getting it wrong. Now, there's an anti-racist position. But inequality is largely as a result of policy. Racist policy. Sorry about this. Remember, 60s, Martin Luther King, laws changed, policies changed, and different opportunities opened up for black people. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it did happen. And it's still happening. Right. I'm sure maybe there's one law in America or one policy which is still pure white. Probably in some of the red states, I think, not the federal so much. Then scrap that law. Scrap that policy. That's what you should do in a liberal society. You've got the right to it, you've got the power to do it. Just do it. But if you're in it for the money, well, then it's a different thing. You can't have it go away if you're making money from it. Right, what's the other thing? CRT advocates the need to identify bad policy and replace them. Okay, that's just I just said. Right, the sixth, and I think it's the last point, I'm not sure. Kendi's advice for having productive conversations about racism. Yes, he's got advice for us. Now let's see what that advice is. The main challenge is that people who argue racism no longer exists have one definition of racism, but they refuse to define it. In contrast, critical race theory have different definitions and argue over definitions. In all the YouTubes I've asked you to watch, have I given a definition? I can't remember one. I know I said it was about the legal system, so I give a description. And they argue over definitions. I just never hear them argue about them. It's not on YouTube. And I can assure you, it's not in academic articles, because I've read a whole lot of them. I'm not discussing those here because they're not easily available. Cost you money. Now, do racism still exist? I'm sure they do. It happens. Remember we had that thing of a woman in a park walking a dog? And I said that could very well be racism. And I believe it was. So yes, racism do exist. But we've only got, or white people only have one definition of racism, or no definition, Well, so they've got one, but they don't tell us what it is. Well, let's see if I've given an answer here. First, what Kendi said, this is why the program How to Be an Anti-Racist is based and built on and grounded in definitions. I haven't seen it. These definitions were not mentally fabricated, but based on evidence, based on scholarship. What evidence? Assertive, critical, creative research? Or objective research? No, not objective. And we also looked at history and material reality. Remember material reality, Marxist? Right. I remember a definition for racism. Let me see if I can get to that one. First, back again to Kendi. This means that when I engage in a constructive sense, it is really to get them to understand race and racism. And the first step is defining things. Remember I said we must define things a few lectures ago, I think it was the second lecturer. So at least Kenny and I are in agreement over that. But now let me get to my critical comments, which I'm just touching on and then going back to him. So this time I'm doing this. The people who argue racism no longer exists may first of all argue from different perspectives, from the conservative to liberal label. Who are you talking to? Are you talking to a conservative person, a supremacist, or are you talking to a liberal person? Or are you talking to a salad? People who just bought into critical race theory. So you have different arguments depending on who you talk to. So saying there's only one definition, first of all, is utter nonsense. Because supremacists will look at it differently from the liberals or the Democrats. Given that this one definition comment is also utter nonsense, I assume that this comment that they refuse to define it is also utter nonsense. What we have here is utter nonsense, it seems. For example, it is well known that a standard definition is that racism is the beliefs and actions based on the idea that one race is innately superior to another. That is a standard definition, even if it goes back to Hitler's ideas. It's a standard definition of racism because Hitler was racist. And you may not believe it, but racism is also truly happening within Russia. Yeah, I've said it. If you don't agree, you can disagree with me. Okay, the idea that CRT theorists have different definitions. Remember, Kendi said they've got different definitions and they argue about them. It's interesting because they define themselves as postmodernists. And here's the thing, a real postmodernist cannot define things. Because according to them, nothing is definable, everything is changing all the time. Defining something will give it an essence. They don't believe in essence. So, where's Kendi? Is he defining things in postmodernism? Critical race theory is not postmodernist anymore, or not postmodernist enough. It doesn't make sense to me. I hope it makes sense to you. When Kendi claims that he engages in conservative sense to get, but he engages in a constructive sense to get for others to understand race and racism. Then I wonder two things. Remember, he said he engages, he defines, he's constructive about it. He's not calling white people evil. He's not doing that. When Kendi claims that he engages in I've just said that. But my two things is this. Is he talking logical constructive as a developmental modernist, or a social constructionist, or as a mentally developed critical postmodernist, where reality is only in your imagination? He actually answers this question with these definitions were not mentally fabricated, but based on evidence, based on scholarship. I've already said, not objective scholarship, subjective scholarship. So the evidence is not worth much. It's the whole reality within which he is defining. Is defined by postmodernists as mentally developed. It's all in the mind. The whole reality is in the mind. So it's just saying the opposite thing. That's very difficult for me. Scholarship refers to critical, creative, postmodernist research, and therefore evidence is what the scholar elite thinks it is. Within science, you do an experiment, you get a result, the result is positive, and this is now evidence for something. And other people can also test this because your test is made available to them, and they can get to an opposite answer, same answer. But over time, the theory builds up and gets stronger and stronger and stronger. At any time, somebody can come along and just make that whole theory null and void with the right evidence. But the thing is, the theory builds up, gets stronger and stronger over time. When Kendi is talking about research and research results within postmodernism, critical postmodernism, there's a group of influential people who decides the zeitgeist they have. What's good, what's not good, bad, and what is evidence and what is not. They decide. As long as you say what they think is right, it's evidence. And you are right. You cannot go there and write an article which is exactly the opposite from what they say and think they're going to improve it. Doubtful. So we need to understand that. The most positive thing Kendi said is that he dedicated almost a full lecture on defining human identity and diversity. Related concepts was the right thing to do. Right. I am thanking you for listening to me, and we're going to have that little break now. And then when we come back, we will discuss what you have done, and you can argue with me about what I said. Thank you very much. Enjoy.